that happens. Why is this? Let's look at what's happening inside. In the plasma, oxygen is just dissolved, right, in the plasma. Plasma is aqueous. Oxygen does not dissolve, have a high solubility, does not dissolve super well, not very soluble. So there is a low amount. When hemoglobin is present, oxygen can bind to hemoglobin. 4 oxygen molecules can bind to each, and this is going to allow us to have high oxygen concentration despite the low solubility of oxygen in plasma and water. And this is how most oxygen is transported in our blood. This is why this matters. Once bound to to hemoglobin, oxygen no longer contributes to the partial pressure of the system, which allows more oxygen to keep diffusing in, which is really useful, right? Remember that partial pressure, actually, don't know if I actually said this, pressure of a gas is because of the gas molecules like hitting against the walls of the container. That's what pressure is, right? Things hitting walls. So partial pressure of oxygen's partial pressure is due to that. If it's bound up to hemoglobin, it can't be exerting that pressure. It can't hit against the walls of the blood vessel. So pretty cool, huh? So we're going to talk about how oxygen first is transported in circulation. However, we're going to do carbon dioxide eventually as well. So here is our tissues. So this might be lung tissues, cells of the lung, or the interstitial space. We're just going to look at, for this picture, this is a capillary, right? This is the capillary wall here. Here's a red blood cell. Oxygen is carried primarily bound to hemoglobin. That's in the red blood cells. This is 98.5% of oxygen. There is a small amount, about 1.5% of O2. It's dissolved in the plasma. It doesn't have a great solubility, so it's not a whole lot. I'll come back to carbon dioxide, but just to give you context in this situation, there is some for carbon dioxide, some in the red blood cells. There is some in the plasma that is going to be in the form of HCO3. And then there's going to be some CO2 also dissolved in the plasma. So at this point, it just makes sense to think about that CO2 is carried both in the plasma and the red blood cells as well. It's actually opposite in terms of like proportions. Most of it's in the plasma and less in the red blood cells. So let's talk about hemoglobin. We have some already, and we're going to here just look at the structure. We will do relate hemoglobin binding to partial pressure of oxygen in the next video. So here is your red blood cells. Each red blood cell has many hemoglobin. HB is hemoglobin. Proteins, right? These are proteins. The cell is packed full of them. Here is a protein. Our proteins here. Alpha helices, beta sheets, a lot of alpha helices. There are 4 subunits of hemoglobin. Protein. This is quaternary structure, it's called. So tertiary is the folding. Quaternary means that there is more than one subunit bound together. The only reason this matters for our purposes is that it can bind 4 oxygen molecules. Each of these alpha and beta chains can bind 1, these beta chains that then form a globular structure. So this is where oxygen binds. There's 4 of them. This is what one looks like. This is a heme group, so iron in the middle here. this is able to bind one oxygen, but there's 4 of them, right? This then makes oxyhemoglobin when oxygen is bound. You know these terms already. We did deoxy, you know the deoxyhemoglobin is when oxygen is not bound. We did this in the blood chapter. This is the form when oxygen is bound to hemoglobin. So like I already told you, this is kind of what we're looking at here. Oxygen's coming in from the lungs. We're going to load oxygen into our blood, right? And most of it gets loaded into the red blood cell. So this is 98.5% in the red blood cell bound to hemoglobin, making oxyhemoglobin. About 1.5% is going to be in the plasma. So this is oxygen loading at the lung tissues. Oxygen is then unloaded at the tissues of the body, right, where we need to use it. We'll come back to this in the next video. The rate at which oxygen is loaded or unloaded primarily onto hemoglobin, right, because that's where most of it is. It's going to depend on the partial pressure of oxygen, which we've already talked about what that is in the lungs. So we will look at that next with our with some nice graphs.